With the virtual model of the robot completed, I want to go ahead and create rendered images and an animation. At the moment you can see the arm is free to move, so I'm going to put an angle constraint between the face of the arm and the face of one of the supports. That's going to be a 0 angle constraint. So with that constraint in place, of course, the arm cannot move. Let's look at one of the easiest ways to make that arm move, and that's a drive constraint. So right-click on the constraint, go to Drive Constraint, and I'll put the end angle as 30. Let's check that out. This is a good area to check your animation. That's working quite well. You can also save that as an animation, but I think we have better ways to do it. Another thing I would suggest you do is that you rename the constraint rather than just angle. Change it to something like Drive Me Claw Arm. So if you have a number of these, then it's easy to find the one you want. I've selected the Environments tab and then Inventor Studio. Inside Studio we have a couple of options, Render Image and Render Animation. Let's start with Render Image. In this case we can select the width and the height. The larger the numbers, of course, the longer it's going to take. So I'm going to change that to 640 by 480. And we have a couple of options here as well. Lighting style, I'm going to go with Cool Color, and you can play around with those and decide which one you think looks best. And then change the scene style to XZ Reflective Ground Plane. Now when you do that, you want to make sure the ground plane is underneath the wheels. In this case mine is good. I'm going to leave render type as shaded, but you may want to experiment with illustration. It gives it kind of a pen and pencil look. It's kind of cool. Anti-aliasing, I'm going to select the highest anti-aliasing, and true reflection is on by default. I'm going to zoom in and pan a little bit. You obviously want this to be the largest possible image inside that 640 by 480 window. And you can pretty well fill up the screen on this one. Once that's done, you can click Render. The render is now completed, and you can see that it took 2 minutes and 4 seconds on my computer to complete that. I would now go ahead and save that rendered image, and I can include that in my documentation. Next phase is to render the animation. First thing I have to do is create a new animation, and then make that animation active. You'll notice the animation timeline is now visible. I'm going to create a camera from the current view and then turn off the visibility of the camera. It'll still work, it's just not visible on the screen. You can see that it's a 30-second animation. I think that's way too long. I'm just going to settle for 10 seconds, so we'll change that. Next thing we want to do is set that camera. And you'll see in a moment why I wanted to do that. I'm now going to go and select the constraint that I want to animate. And if you recall, we renamed that to Drive Me Claw Arm, so it's pretty easy to find. So between 0 degrees, and let's go up 30 degrees. Over a time period starting at 0 and ending at 10. That's the whole animation. Let's go back to the beginning. I always like to test these and see how they look. Just make sure there's no errors at this stage, and we can see the arm is moving. So I can stop that and back to the beginning. If you want to see what's happening in terms of the timeline, you can expand that and you can actually edit it in there as well. I'm now going to move to 3 seconds. And at the 3-second mark, I'm going to change the view. Then I'm going to take a snapshot. So between 0 seconds and 3 seconds, the robot will turn. And you can have as many of these as you want. You simply move to a point in time, take a snapshot with the camera, and it will transition between one view and the other. Let's see how that looks. So between 0 and 3, it transitions from the isometric view to that front view, back to the isometric, and all the time that that's happening is the arm's raising from 0 degrees to 30 degrees. I can now go ahead and render the animation. If you've done any rendering before, you'll realize this can be quite time consuming. For example, I have anti-aliasing set to maximum. I also need to set the specified time range, which is the entire animation, 10 seconds. My frame rate's currently 15. Little tip here, to check that long rendering time, go to Preview No Render. And what will happen is in 2 or 3 minutes, you'll get a quick but poor quality animation that you can check. I'm going to go ahead here and create the real thing. So I've clicked on Render. I'm going to save that as VEX Clawbot. Accept the properties, click OK, and then start the rendering. So each frame will be rendered one by one. Well, we've done a couple of them now, and I now realize that that time remaining is 6 hours and 2 minutes. So this is definitely something I would start late at night, and then when you get up in the morning, the animation will be complete. And here's an example of what you can expect. The robot turning, the arm going up 30 degrees and returning to the isometric.